Marie Cosgrove is the woman that I will introduce you today. A very powerful story that begins in her early childhood, probably before she was born. Well, the reason that she is in this world, you will discover through her journey. Because as we say, nothing is accidental. She was supposed to be an accidental child in this world. But every sign that she started to connect together very soon was telling her that she was here for a purpose. She has experienced child abuse, marriage abuse, domestic violence, every kind of very awful feeling that a woman can imagine. Everything is in this story. But this is just the beginning, because as we usually believe, we can't change the beginning, but we can change the end. This is what Marie decided to do with her life. Her early beginnings was out of her control. She could not do anything because she was not responsible for that. Other people were taking decisions for her. But very soon, she realized that she is in charge for her present and for her future. And this is what exactly she did. She took control in her life and her children's life and decided that now everything is going to change, to break that circle of abuse and to become the person that she deserves to be. I invite you to watch this amazing story and feel every kind of emotion and the words that she expresses as a contribution for every woman that resonates with this story.
So I remember my journey started as a young child. It was quite difficult for me to recognize when I learned that I had a purpose in life or that there was something more for me. My journey was quite tough because I was born out of wedlock. I was born as a result of rape. My mother was in a car accident and she had permanent brain damage. She was actually in a coma for over 3 months. And when she arrived at the hospital, the doctor said that she was lucky that she had made it this far because she had severe bleeding in the brain. My grandmother said she didn't believe in luck. She demanded that they do surgery on my mother to stop the bleeding. The doctor said that they couldn't do surgery because if they did, she would end up dead immediately or she would end up a vegetable, and they didn't have a surgeon close by. My grandmother insisted that they do surgery. So they brought in a doctor after a lot of debates. They finally brought in a doctor. They did surgery. She remained in a coma for 2 months. And the doctor said that there was no sign of improvement, that they were going to pull the plug on her. And they had been traveling from Texas to Mexico to a wedding when the accident happened. My grandmother said, no, I don't want the plug pulled. I want her sent to the States. So they sent my mother back to the States. And in the States, the doctor said, there's nothing we can do. She remained in a coma for another month. And then the doctor said, we're going to pull the plug. And my grandmother said, no, just give me one more day. The very next day, my mother opened her eyes and she had to learn how to walk, talk, and do everything all over again. She still had brain damage, but she was going home. Unfortunately, on her path to recovery, she was out with some friends, and while she was out with her friends, she was raped. When she was raped, she ended up pregnant, and the doctor said, there's no way, mentally, physically, that she can carry this baby. She's under a lot of medications. This baby's going to be born with all types of physical defects and mental defects, so the baby needs to be aborted. Plus, at that time in the 70s, it was a very shameful thing, especially in my culture, Hispanic culture, to have a child out of wedlock. The doctor said that's going to bring a lot of shame upon the family. My mother said that God had saved her life. She wasn't going to allow anyone to touch her body and take the life that was inside of her. And so she said, no, I'm not going to allow you to abort this child. And the doctors were trying to convince my grandparents to abort. My grandmother supported my mother, and she says, I'll help you raise this child. And I'm, very blessed that they made that decision, because out of that, I was born, out of that situation. And that's why I'm here today. So I feel very incredibly blessed, but I didn't always see it that way. There was a point in my life where I felt that there was no purpose for me, that I was a mistake, that I was an accident, and that I shouldn't have been born. And I had family members that were very supportive. My grandfather, I thank him for who I am today. I also had family members that would remind me that I was a bastard child and that I was cursed. And they would twist some, religion and some dogma and twist some Bible verses and interpret them in a way that they shouldn't be interpreted or told to a child. So I was constantly reminded, you're a bastard child. You don't have a father. You're not part of the family. You're cursed for 10 generations. You'll never be anything. And growing up, those are the voices that I often listened to. And I grew up with a very low self-esteem, which caused me to make very poor decisions in my teenage years. And fortunately, there was someone in my life who shared with me that I did have value, that all of us have value, and all of us matter. And that's when I realized that I did have a purpose, and I did have a reason to be here, like all of us do. I had, unfortunately, many dark moments because my mother had brain damage, so she had mental problems. She wasn't quite sane, and she didn't have a moral compass. I would stay with her on weekends, and on weekends she would bring men over, and she would have relations with different men, and I was exposed to that. So I always had this darkness and this shame inside of me. I always felt that I was dirty, that nothing could cleanse me of this shame. And I grew up feeling this way for quite a long time. And I had a lot of dark moments. I also had some good moments. When I was with my grandparents, I spent time with my grandfather and my grandmother in their work. My grandfather was a barber. My grandmother was a beauty salon cosmetologist. So she had a beauty shop. And I spent a lot of time at the beauty shop and the barber shop. And those were good times. But it was when I went to my mother's that it was really dark. And she was married to a man that was very, very good. But it was while he was out working that she would bring other men in. And when I was 12 years old, I was so close to him. But he ended up committing suicide. And when I was 12, I saw that. I walked into the room and he had hung himself. And so I had a very hard time dealing with that I went through a major depression. And the counselor in school said, there's no way she can stay in school. She's just too depressed. My grandparents didn't know what to do with me. So they sent me to go live with an aunt and uncle. And things seemed to get worse from there. My uncle abused me, and I went through a major depression. I couldn't talk about it or share what had happened to me with anyone, but because I was so depressed and always crying, my uncle would blame it on the suicide. She's crying because of that. And a counselor finally uncovered and was able to get it out of me, what had happened to me. So I went back to live with my grandparents. And that darkness followed me because that's what I was focused on. I was always afraid. I was afraid of men. I was afraid of people. I was afraid of anybody finding out what had happened to me. And I just felt so ashamed, so dirty, so dark. And I didn't want anybody to know what had happened to me. Therefore, I didn't really have many friends, because I felt if they found out, it would be worse. And I would, be looked down upon. And so I was very, quiet, very shy. I tried to stay to myself, and I wasn't a normal teenage kid that had lots of friends, and I was not active as a teenager and socially. When you have a lot of abuse and a lot of trauma in life, sometimes many times you make poor choices, and you make choices that are not good for you. And I tended to do that to myself. Now, knowing that I didn't have much of a financial support because my grandparents were not rich, I didn't feel that I would ever go to college or become anything. I started working at a very young age. By the time I was 16, I was working. I was good at computer programming. So at work, I did very well. I was working for a commercial print shop, doing computer programming, a lot of software development. However, my personal life was completely chaotic. And I ended up getting married very young, my very first boyfriend. And we got married, and he would beat me. I had my first child at 21. And looking back, if you asked me 10 years ago, what happened, I had bad luck, I married a bad guy. Now looking back, I realized that I had very poor self-esteem because I continued in that relationship. We broke up, he went through counseling, and then we got back together, and I got pregnant again. Then I had this hope that, if I just do this right, maybe he'll love me and he won't hit me again. And then he'd be like, I'm so sorry, please forgive me. I'm like, okay, I forgive you. Get back together again. And he'd beat me again. And that cycle continued for quite a while. And I believe the only reason I was able to get out of that cycle is because he found somebody else. And the only reason I never went back is because he lost parental rights. And he could never see the children again because abuse was so bad that the judge said that there was no way he was going to allow him to see those children. And that gave me the strength to push forward in regards to providing for my family, providing for my children, and becoming stronger in work. And in work, I did very well to be able to get out of that. But I still went through struggles because I was working at a Fortune 500 company, but I had to quit that job because 2 of my children had serious medical conditions. My son was suffering from JDMS. It's an autoimmune disease, and he had arthritis, and he was on a lot of strong medications. He had to go to physical therapy 3 times a week. My daughter was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome because of the violence that she saw. And I just couldn't continue working and taking care of my kids. I had to quit my job and take care of my kids. And I thought if I did freelance work, I could maybe support myself. But it wasn't enough money, so I ended up losing my house. I ended up losing my car, losing everything. And I had another aunt and uncle who allowed me to stay at their house, but they didn't have a lot. So we had to sleep on the living room floor, me and the kids. And my daughter would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, crying, from like midnight till 3 or 4 in the morning because of the post-traumatic stress syndrome that she was suffering from. And I didn't know how to calm her down. I didn't know how to stop her from crying. And my aunt and uncle said, you need to get a good paying job and get out and find your own place because we got to go to work. We can't stay here. She wakes us up in the middle of the night, and then my baby would wake up screaming. So it was a very tough time in my life. But I was thankful that I had my kids because at that point, I felt so guilty And it didn't matter what I had gone through, but knowing that my kids had gone through what I went through was so painful. I mean, I'd go into the restroom and lock myself and cry every single morning, feeling guilty for doing that. But I started looking at how thankful that I was that we were no longer in danger and they were no longer being abused. And I decided that no one would hurt my kids ever again. I would not put them through that. And so I decided to try to get a job in sales, because I thought if I get a job in sales, I can make my own way. The sky's the limit. And I interviewed at a lot of different places. I remember I interviewed at a radio station, and they said, well, you got the job. And I said, okay, great. They said, the only problem, it's commission and salary. And I said, I don't want salary, I want straight commission. They said, well, we don't work that way. And it was a big corporation. They said, company policy is we pay you salary and commission. I said, I want straight commission. I said, well, we can't break company policy. So I was, I need to find something. And I had a friend of mine, because I did some freelance, and her name was Dr. Ramamurthy. And she says, Marie, there is a company that is looking for a marketing rep. And I had experience in marketing. So when I spoke with the gentleman, he's like, well, this is sales. You don't have experience in sales. We can't hire you. And I said, oh, well, I have experience in marketing, and I have to sell my ideas. That's sales. And he just laughed at me. He says, no, that's not sales. I convinced him to give me an opportunity to speak with his boss. And so when I spoke with his boss was laughing at me, saying, oh, little girl, you're just not going to make it in this industry. And I said, look, give me an opportunity. If I pay my way through training, would you give me a chance? And he says, fine. So I got a babysitter. I went through training. And it was a big group, like 40 people, executives, male executives. I was the only female. And I was in the back of the room. And I was really excited because I did really well over the next couple of days, and I got 100 on all the tests. But the very last day, I'll never forget, the president came up to me and he pointed his finger at me and he says, little girl, you're never going to make it in this industry. It's a man's world. It's a man's industry. The most you're ever going to sell is candy. Why don't you just go home? Well, I was not embarrassed. I was upset. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just give me 30 days, straight commission. You have nothing to lose. And he agreed. So I had a 30-day contract. I was really excited because I'm like, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. So I went back home. And when I got home, my grandfather, who helped raise me, was diagnosed with leukemia, and he was in the hospital. So I spent every day by his bedside, and I didn't do any sales. But I was reading while I was on his bedside, learning about sales. And 3 weeks passed, and my grandfather passed away. And I received a call from the president, and he says, little girl, your time's up. You haven't sold anything. We're canceling your contract. And I said, I've got 1 week left. And he just laughed, hung up on me. Well, that week, I called on lots and lots of doctors, and unfortunately, they all shut the door on me. But on the very last day, I was able to close a doctor. I sold him an equipment, and I made the quota for 3 months. And so within 6 months, I was the #1 national sales representative in the company. Then within a year, I beat everybody. So I maintained that quota. Unfortunately, that company lost their distributorship of the products they were selling, and I couldn't sell anymore because they lost their contract. So the manufacturer that they had the contract with contacted me directly and said, we want you to sell for us because you've been doing the majority of the sales. But I couldn't do that because I had a contract, and the owner of the other distribution company said, if you go sell for them, we'll sue you. Well, I'm a single mom with kids. I had no financial support. I didn't want to risk that. So I had to find other companies to sell for. So then I found another company called Balance Back. And I asked them if I could sell for them, and they didn't really want to take the risk. But one of the VPs of marketing saw my track record. So he says, you know, we're going to give you a chance. So I started selling a lot of equipment. I did really well with them, and it wasn't competition with the other distributors, so they couldn't be upset about that. And unfortunately, after about a couple of years, I got a call from one of the owners, one of the VPs, and he says, you know what, we're tired of writing. We wrote you a check for $70,000 last month. He goes, you're not a doctor. And he says, are you a scientist? I'm like, no. Are you an engineer? No. He goes, you don't have the qualifications, and we're tired of writing these checks to you. So we're going to offer you a salary position. And the salary they offered me was hardly enough to take care of my expenses. And I said, I can't accept that. And they said, well, then you can't sell for us. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to bring all the sales in-house, and you're not going to be able to sell for us. So there I was again without a job, and I had children to support, but I looked at what I had accomplished. And sometimes when we go through challenges, we have to redefine ourselves, and we have to look at the possibilities and look at not the negative, you know, that's happened to us, but look at the positive. And I started another company. And within 2 years, I built that company to a $14 million company. And it was also in healthcare. And then I received a call from the same guy that had called me and said, you can't sell for us. He called me and says, hey, would you be interested in investing in the company that had fired me? So I said, well, I need to look at the numbers. And I flew to Ohio, and we did evaluation, and we looked at the numbers, and I looked at the years when I did the sales. I said, wow, you know, I did quite a few of the sales. I want to, you know, I'm interested in buying the company. And I ended up buying the company that had let me go. And so that's how I basically started to look at life, instead of looking at impossibilities, looking at the possibilities of, you know, what could be. Because a lot of times we end up looking at, oh, I can't do this because, you know, for whatever reason, I don't have the background, I don't have the education, I don't have the skill set. What you don't have, instead of what is possible and what you can contribute, and look at all of your assets and the things that you do have, because everybody has something that they're good at. I feel like I'm in a very good place. I mean, we all have challenges. I mean, it would be naive to say that life is perfect now, even though I feel that I have accomplished a lot. I feel that I am contributing to society. It would be naive to say there's no more challenges, because when you're a business owner, you always have challenges. You're always facing these challenges, but you can always reinvent yourself, or you can always look at things differently and look at things from a different perspective. So some of the things that I would say to women that are facing challenges is, and this sounds so simple, and it sounds kind of silly, but it's a practice that I do every day, is I look at what I'm thankful for today. And there's always something to be thankful for. So I give myself a list of 10 things I'm thankful for, and I write that every single day. And I even have some salespeople write that. Some of the people in my organization do that on a daily basis, because it's a very good exercise. Because no matter how tough the situation seems, there's always something to be thankful for. I look at the time when I was in the living room floor, my aunt's house, and I remember I started to look at my children and started to be thankful that we were no longer in danger. But I could have looked at, oh, we're homeless, we don't have our house of our own, we're living in the living room floor, and just look at all the self-pity and all of the bad things we've gone through. So I started looking at the positive things, what we did have, and it does something to change the way you think and to look at the future of the possibilities instead of the past. And it is hard when you go through something that's so difficult. Those memories will always be there, but you're not there anymore. You know, like I can say right now, I'm in a safe place. I'm not where I was, and I have control of where I'm going where I'm going today and tomorrow, and I can have goals. And I would suggest everybody should have goals. Everybody should write goals down, because goals, it's very powerful to write goals down. And it's amazing what happens when you have goals for yourself and then you see those goals coming to pass and happening for you. I've been in a place where I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. I felt like it was my fault. I felt when I was abused as a young girl that was my fault. But it's never your fault. There are some twisted people that'll say, well, maybe you enjoyed it or maybe it was your fault. It's never your fault when you've been abused or when you've been beat. Nobody deserves to be beat or to be abused emotionally or physically, because every single person has value. Every single person is important and every single person matters. I have a strong faith. I believe in God. I believe in a creator. So I do believe that I was wonderfully made. I didn't always believe that, but I believe that now. But even if you don't believe that, it's even a greater miracle thinking about evolution and that you came from a single cell, because science proves that you are unique. You have an individual fingerprint. You have an individual voice box. Nobody in the world has a voice box like yours. Nobody in the world has an iris like yours. That's why we now have a lot of the security is through eye recognition, iris or fingerprinting, because there's not a single person like you and everybody is unique. And as women, sometimes we get ourselves into trouble because we start comparing ourselves among other women, and that's one of the worst things that you can do, because you are beautiful just the way you are. And I don't care if you've been abused, if you've been molested, if you've been beat, or where you came from. I'm a product of rape, but I know that I have value, and I know that I matter, and I know that you matter. And it doesn't matter where you came from or your background. Everybody is unique and everybody has a purpose in life. And so I would suggest that you look at what is your passion, and look at and dig deep into what your passion is and follow your dreams, because it is possible. If I was able to come out of where I came from, anybody can achieve what their dreams are. Thinking about all the adversities that I have faced, I believe that it's made me stronger. Napoleon Hill says, with every adversity comes a greater or equal benefit. And I really truly believe that, because what I have gone through has helped me become stronger and more compassionate towards other people that have gone through this. For example, I do a lot of volunteer work with youth. So I have youth programs that I work with troubled teens in the juvenile system in the United States. And they're teens that have gone through extreme adversities and they feel that they have no way out. But I know that they do, because I myself have found the way out. And one of my passions is also working with entrepreneurs and young business owners and helping them start their businesses and helping them take their businesses to a higher level. One of the ways that I can be reached is, since I do have my business, it's a medical device manufacturing company, I also do some private coaching and I do workshops. I've been blessed that I was able to build a business from nothing. I did not get any investors' money or bank loans, and I built it to a $14 million business. I'm very also blessed that the company that let me go, I purchased them. And this was 7 years ago, so it's an international company, and it is in a very it's still male-dominated industry, medical device manufacturing. You don't have too many women owners. And since I've reached this financial success, I have this desire to give back and to help other people reach the financial success that I've been able to reach. But not only the financial success, but the emotional, and being able to be at peace with where you are despite challenges that you're facing. Because all of us get stuck. And one of the things that I learned is through my travels, I've been blessed to be able to travel to Paraguay, Panama, Costa Rica, different countries to do leadership training from the top down, all the way from the president to hospitals and education, universities, that I found that whether you're a millionaire or I'm working with kids in the juvenile system, everybody gets stuck. Everybody. Whether you're a millionaire, even a billionaire, or you're making minimum wage. And so I have this passion to help others, to help them get unstuck the way I myself got unstuck from where I was.